Hi, welcome to Evidence for Faith. It's your host, Michael Lane. I want to take you today on a trip to Jerusalem. I want to take you someplace that tour guides often take people, but they take them to the wrong place. We're talking about the tomb of King David. Now, if you've been on a tour, or if you ever go there, many tour guides will take you to the southwest quarter of the old city. And there's a large church there with a sarcophagus. It's beautifully decorated, et cetera, et cetera. It is what they call the tomb of King David. It is not the tomb of King David. King David, during the time of David's reign, Jerusalem was just this little 32-acre place, very skinny little city going down the side of the mountain, Mount Moriah. Where this tomb of King David sits, that they often take you to, is way over out of the city on the top of a different mountain. That is not the place. And we know that Jerusalem was the place where David was buried, because it says this in many places in Scripture. As a matter of fact, in Acts 2, Peter talks about that they know the location of David's tomb. So where is this? Join me as we go to Jerusalem and go to a place hardly any tourists ever go to. But it is what most scholars believe is the true tomb of King David. It's on the side of the old city of Jerusalem. It's not too far from the Gihon Spring and the Pool of Siloam. It's in between. But right down in this valley, there is a very interesting place. Let me take you there, because I'm going to tell you it doesn't look anything like a graveyard, but I'll explain why it looks like this. So join me as we go to Jerusalem. Okay, we are now climbing up and coming into what's called the tombs of the kings of the old city of David. And David's city sat on the side of Mount Moriah. You can see this very plainly here, because up at the top of that hill there, that's Mount Moriah. That is the temple, the Dome of the Rock area today, but that's where the second temple, Herod's temple as often people call it, that's where it's at. That's the southern boundary of it. So we're looking through. To the right is the Kidron Valley, but you can see how steep this is. And as we're going to continue now, we're going to be walking down this way, and we're coming into the tombs of the kings. Now this is interesting, because Jews generally did not bury people inside the city, because there's a chance of touching a tomb and becoming unclean. But there's several places in Scripture that I will show you in a moment that state that that David was actually buried in the city walls. It's in Scripture in more than one place. So let me show you when we get down here. But this is the tombs of the kings. Now, most people, they look at this and it's like, this does not look like a graveyard. The reason for that, at the time of Christ, up until about 132 AD, after the second Jewish revolt with Hadrian destroyed the city, leveled it totally, even renamed it. No longer called it Jerusalem, was called Aelia Capitolina. Now, to do this, he built a temple to Jupiter up on top of the Temple Mount to desecrate the Jewish temple. And so there was a huge temple that sat up there. It sat up there for a couple hundred years. Most people don't know that. But to build a new city, they needed stones. So they came down here, where the city wall went just on the other side of this, and the ancient city wall, and they started coming in here because there was good stone to use. And you're going to notice as we walk through here, some stone has been cut out. You can see 90-degree angles cut. That's not natural. You're going to see this. We'll point some of them out because it's very obvious. But this was the tombs of the kings. And we will get down there, and I'm going to take you to King David's tomb as we go through here. During the time of the Pentecost in Acts, and Peter stands up and teaches a lesson and preaches a sermon, he actually mentions that King David's tomb was known where it was. They knew the location, and he said his body was still in it. So we know that it was here because he says it's here in the city. Now notice here, as we come to this one, how this cut has been made, and you can tell this is man-made. This is not a natural occurrence to have this limestone be in that type of angle. There was a huge boulder that was cut out and was taken up into the city to help build the city. If we just pan this around the camera, you can see more evidence of this, how the Romans came in here and started cutting. Notice this stone here, how this has been cut out of the ground, out of the bedrock here, and it would be then moved up to help build the city. Here they were working on another one when they stopped for some odd reason. Here is another one that they had cut and removed. So they're cutting. Now what the thing is, what's really happening here, they're cutting in the royal cemetery. That when we get down there, I'll read some passages and show you that this is in the royal cemetery. Not all the kings were buried here. There was a few that were not. King Uzzah, he was a leper, and he was buried in a garden outside a different place because he was really unclean because of his leprosy. But right now, we are walking over several very likely tombs. And you can see how the Romans have been cutting all of this. But we're heading specifically to one that I want to take you to and tell you the story of that because it's fascinating. Now, as we keep coming down, you're going to start to notice this still doesn't look like a graveyard. You got to remember, where I'm standing right now, where we're filming this, would have been totally in solid rock up to 132 AD. So at the time of the apostles and Jesus, this was solid rock. The Romans have cut this down because this is good stone and you need stone to build things. And so that's where they're getting a lot of their stone is down here. And as we keep coming, we're going to see today they've got a little partition over here, but we're going to come around and we're going to show you an old tomb. And there's one right here. This tomb is called T2. T2. And this tomb is sort of elaborate. Remember, this was underground. Where we are standing is underground. And the body would have been placed back in here. And this is where the tomb would be. But if you turn around, as we turn the camera around and look this direction, you're going to see this looks like a culvert or something that was never completed. This was totally enclosed. This would have been a totally enclosed place with a small opening, and this would have come in to put some of the kings. Some scholars suggest that this might have been Solomon. We have no idea. It's definitely a tomb in the royal cemetery. So we don't know whose body was put in here. But when the Romans came and cut through the tops of this and cut down the sides, they obviously plundered the tombs. But this is not the one I want to show you. I want to go to T1 next door. This is T1. Believe it or not, this is a major archaeological site. You'd never guess it. There's a sofa in here. There's trash everywhere. Every time I've come here, it has just been trashed out. But this one has unique features. This, many scholars believe, this was King David's tomb. And we're going to take you down inside of here and explain and talk about what we have here in Scripture too. Now we're down here. Big opening in the front here that the Romans have cut out. Huge opening. And it's been controversial for some that these are the actual tombs. And if we look over to this direction, remember, we're way underground. This would have all been solid rock, carved out little tunnels for tombs. And when David died, during the 10th century, and somewhere in there, and Solomon took over, this is where David was buried. And we're going to go inside here, and I want to point out a few things to you as we go in here. But look at the small opening to go in here. First, to show you something that's fascinating here, you're going to notice in this tomb, there's a ledge here that goes on both sides. Some scholars suggest that this was a ledge, and this tomb that goes back quite a ways. It's about 52 feet long total. It's 8 feet wide, and it goes back quite a ways there. But they suggest that this was probably one of the rooms, storage rooms, in David's tomb. I want to take you to the book of Josephus. In his book called The Antiquities of the Jews, chapter 7, verse 14, he talks about David's burial and what the history of this tomb area was. So let me read this passage here for you. This is, again, out of Josephus, first century Jewish historian. talking about David, he was buried by his son in Jerusalem with great magnificence and with other funeral pomp, which kings are used to be buried with. Moreover, he had great and immense wealth. This is talking to David. Great and immense wealth buried with him in vastness, of which may be easily conjectured at by what I now say. For 1,300 years afterwards, Hyrcanus, the high priest, when he was besieged by Antiochus, opened the room of David's sepulchre and took out 300,000 talents of silver and gave part of that sum to Antiochus. Now, did you catch what I just said? Opened up one of the tombs, one of the rooms of King David, one of the rooms. It continues, nay, after him, and that many years after, Herod, this is Herod the Great, Herod the king opened another room and took away a great deal of money, and neither of them came at the coffin of the kings themselves, for their bodies were buried under the earth so artfully, they did not appear to even those that entered into the monuments. Thus, the king's tomb back here. These would be the rooms. This would have possibly been a false floor. Now, this whole area was actually discovered by a French archaeologist, Raymond Weil, and he came in here in around 1913. He was digging in here. He published in a dig in the 1920s, but he actually stated that he was looking for the tombs. Now, looking for the tombs of the kings, where did he go and how did he find it? He just went to the Bible itself. And he was searching through the Bible trying to figure out where is the location. And there's a number of places that are mentioned. I mean, there's a lot of passages we read. In 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 10, it reads, then David slept with his father and was buried in the city of David, which is right where you are. We go to 2 Chronicles chapter 21, verses 18 through 20. We get a hint where the tombs are. After all this, the Lord struck down his bowels with an incurable disease. In the course of time, at the end of 2 years, his bowels came out. And there's an interesting picture in your mind. Because of the disease, and he died in great agony. His people made no fire in his honor, like the fires made for his fathers. Yes. Now here we go. He was 32 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 8 years in Jerusalem, and he departed with no one's regret. They buried him in the city of David, but not among the tombs. So there's another place where some kings got buried, but not here. So that tells us something. This specifically mentions then that there is a specific place for the kings to be buried. We move to chapter 32, verse 33 of 2 Chronicles, and it reads, and Hezekiah slept with his fathers, and they buried him in the upper part of the tombs of the son of David. And all Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem did him honor in his death. So kings are being buried here. But then we get another major clue that is so important, and it's found in the book of Nehemiah. You recall Nehemiah came back from Babylon to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. Look what he mentions in Nehemiah chapter 3 as he's repairing the walls, verse 16. After him, Nehemiah, the son of Azbuk, ruler of half the district of Bethshur, repaired to a point opposite the tombs of David, as far as an artificial pool, that would be the pool of Siloam, which is just to the south of here, just stone's throw, and as far as the house of the mighty men. This is talking about Nehemiah specifically mentioning where the tombs of the kings were, that it's inside these city walls, because he's giving us a direction of where he's doing this. And he talks about this thing called the Fountain Gate, which the Fountain Gate, that's the Gihon Spring. So between there and the pool of Siloam, Gihon Spring was up to the north of here. Pool of Siloam is just to the south. That's where he said the kings of the tombs were. So Raymond Weil, he actually started digging right in this area here because of these Bible verses, and that's what he found here. And as I said, in Acts chapter 2, verse 29, Peter says, brother, I say to you with confidence about the patriarch David, that both he died and was buried, and his tomb is with us to this day. Everybody knew where the tomb was. So, how do we know that this isn't something else? Well, later on, Dame Kathleen Kenyon, one of the greatest archaeologists of Israel that ever lived, she examine Wheel's work and took a look at this. And she came and she was looking over this, what he was talking about, and she concluded that this is not the tombs of the kings. This is actually a cistern for storing water. Now, there's a problem. I don't know how she missed this, but it's so obvious. There are cracks in here. Cracks through this. How is this going to hold water? Also, cisterns all through Israel are plastered with a waterproof plaster on the inside. You don't see any evidence of that here. All you see here is just the tools cutting into the stone. Here we're at the southern part of the Temple Mount. This is a cistern. You can still see the waterproof plaster that was put all around this to hold the water. So this is a cistern. You don't see anything like this at David's tomb. So I'm sorry, Dame Kathleen Kenyon made a major error in her judgment on what that tomb was. It was not a cistern. This is a cistern, and it doesn't resemble anything dealing with David's tomb. So what we're in the underside, probably the treasure rooms, or possibly even an area where they put more of the bones. One thing that we often read over in Scripture, and when we read the Old Testament in particular, that when someone dies, they went and were buried with their fathers. And we often think, oh, well, that just means that they died and now they're going to meet their fathers up in heaven or something. That is not what that means. Not at all. What that means is, what they would do is they would bury people, families, in the same tomb. And during the Old Testament, the Iron Age 1 and 2, what they did is they took the bodies afterwards, after they had decayed and broken down the skeleton, and then they would just put them into a pile, or they would put the other body, their descendants and stuff right in there with them. So the bones are all mixed. But that's being laid with their fathers, how that tomb goes, or that saying goes. But what I want to do is I'm going to try, I don't know if I can possibly get up here, but I don't know if I can anyway get up that. I would love to get up in there, because this goes back, and when you go back to the back of this, there is a depression in there where you can see a body would have been laid. Goes all the way back. There's no cistern. There's no purpose for having a cistern, as some critics will point out that they say that's what this was. Makes no sense whatsoever, because there's a depression, and the depression, actually, the dimensions of it are 4 by 6. And so 4 feet by 6 feet, that's perfect for laying a body, particularly at that time period, because not that many Israelites were that tall. But that's what we find here in this beautiful spot here. So if you've ever wondered if we know the location of King David's tomb, this is it. It's called T1. It's the most elaborate of all of the tombs that were here. Now, wasn't that an exciting trip? Taking us to Jerusalem, to the tomb of the kings. And though you'd never recognize it today as being a graveyard, I've explained to you now why it's like that. Thanks for joining us, and I hope this has really added to your faith. Until we meet again, take care, and may God bless.
Thanks for tuning in, and thank you to our donors who make this program possible. Evidence for Faith is a 501c3 nonprofit ministry based in the USA. You can support this broadcast by donating online using the links in the description, and don't forget to leave us a comment, a review, likes, and shares to feed the algorithm and help others find this content. Thanks again, and we'll see you on the next episode.